Hi folks, in this video we continue the discussion of Ivan's speech rebellion. What I want you to do is pause your videos and think about what we learned of Ivan's character from the speech. The speech actually brings up lots of rich themes throughout the entire story, and it gives us a very deep picture of who Ivan is. So I want you to pause your videos and see if you can fill in the details for me before we talk about it. Okay, that was your last chance to pause your videos. Only if you try to engage in these acts of interpretation yourselves is this really going to stick with you and be valuable. So here's a couple of things I think that we learned. One is Ivan's speech is pretty well made. I think it's impressive that Dostoevsky could have a character who he fundamentally disagrees with making such an eloquent speech. So Ivan really is a good philosopher. He is a smart, intelligent, part of the intelligentsia from Moscow. And he also really follows logic and reason to its natural conclusion. According to him, the evidence against God's existence is more strong than the evidence for God's existence, and that's why he's an atheist. So we have a well spelled out explanation for his atheism. He's logically consistent. He's not going to just let him believe theism because that's the way he was raised with a religious family or something, or believe it because his priest tells him to, or any other reasons. He's going to actually be the objective decider. But at the same time, even though Dostoevsky makes the speech impressive in certain ways, you can see if you look at all of the details about childhood suffering, Ivan comes across as really sadistic. I mean, there's something creepy about his character, attending to every little detail about the suffering of the children. So I think for Dostoevsky, I think we're supposed to see this as double-edged. There's a bit of irony here too. We're not supposed to just be wowed over and love Ivan after this. There's something really deeply creepy about the sadism there. And this gives us a little distance and skepticism about Ivan's true motives. We're supposed to see through them a little bit because Ivan happily represents himself as a devil figure. And there's a way in which, so the rebellion, this is like a reference to Christ's the devil that Christ could have had against God when he's tempted by the devil in the desert. Christ rejects rebellion, but Ivan is sort of saying, no, I'm going to one up Jesus. I'm going to engage in rebellion from the moral high ground because I actually have a deeper sympathy for suffering. And if one actually truly appreciates how horrific suffering is, one wouldn't even go along with it like the Christian tradition asks us to. So Ivan really does represent the rebellion against God really is making him a devil-like figure. That is a kind of symbolism and metaphor that we're clearly supposed to get from this episode. Another thing is Ivan does experience love of a certain type. And this goes back to the characterizations of Ivan that I've given previously. It's because he really is tuned into the suffering of children. But notice that it's a very detached, objective kind of suffering. He doesn't go out and start adopting children and engaging in the life of actually improving the lives of these children in significant ways. He's just going to write sort of philosophical treatises about it and engage in detached debates about it in the bar, in the cafe, rather than being involved in the world. This is a very detached, remember him as the eyewitness and the objective observer who's not really getting deeply involved in things. This sort of aspect of his love fits that to a T. This perfectly exemplifies his bearing on the world and his existential condition. Let me also say, he's deeply involved with his head and with logic and with reason. And whether he's involved in the heart, it's sort of torn in a certain way. And this is the duality, this is the razor's edge that Ivan lives on. He could go either way in the story. He could fall in love with Katya and have it work out and be successful. Or he could connect with Alyosha and find religion, find Christianity and be saved. So Ivan's fate really is up for grabs, and we need to attend carefully to what happens to him throughout the rest of the story. Let me give you a couple of my other favorite lines that are really interesting from this passage. One is, here we have a characterization. Ivan says, cruel people, passionate, carnivorous, Karamazovian people. So here we see Karamazovs really are representing the human condition in Dostoevsky. And this, we see the passionate carnivorous side. Ivan is identifying this human condition with the base bodily side. But he says even people like that can love children sometimes. This, ironically, is a perfect description of Ivan because he is really a Karamazov in certain ways, but he loves children in his own versions too at the exact same time. as much as he wants to repress his Karamazov side and is disgusted by Fyodor and Dmitri, he is attuned to it too. He realizes that at certain points in the story. There's also this really wonderfully ironic line that humans have created the devil in our own likeness. This is a double twist or a double reference because, of course, in Christianity, God created humans, us, in his likeness. But at one point in the story, Ivan quotes the famous line that if God didn't exist, humans would have had to invent him. So instead of God creating humans, it's humans creating God. Here we have a second level of irony to it. It's not, so humans did create God according to Ivan. It's just a fiction of our imaginations. But humans didn't create God in our own likeness. Humans invented the devil too, and it's the devil's who actually is our likeness, because humans really are at base, we are cruel, carnivorous Karamazovian people who do all sorts of horrible things. And if we're blind to that, then we are blind to what humans are really like. Just reinforcing this theme, this other line, which is just an amazing line. There is this phrase, animal cruelty, Ivan says, to describe like when humans are being the most terrible to each other. But Ivan says that's actually quite offensive to animals, because no animals are as cruel as humans are. Human cruelty is far more pernicious than animal cruelty ever could be. And he illustrates that with many of those examples of terrible suffering in the story. So these are some of the quotes I think that give us a deeper understanding of Ivan and how he really is. He is repulsed by his Karamazovian compassionate side. He doesn't want to be like those cruel people. From an intellectual level, he judges them as terrible people, and he knows that. And as in so much as he's in touch with this part of himself, he completely tries to reject or suppress it. At the same time, too, the kind of love he experiences is not really the spiritual one. Remember at the beginning of this passage, Ivan says like, oh, I do love the earth in certain, and you can only love it with your guts in this deep primal way. But ultimately, we can see his love is of a quite detached kind, not an involved sort. So I think we learn a lot about Ivan's character to understand his existential state through this speech. Now, what about Alyosha? Does Alexei agree with Ivan? What's the denouement of the story? What's the events that this turns on at the end? Okay, so pause your videos. I really want you to think about Alexei's state and how this speech affects him. What does Ivan win the argument or not? That's my question for you. Okay, I really mean you to pause your videos. Don't just guess or something. Because only if you think about this stuff yourself, you can't just listen to my interpretations. You have to try to puzzle it out, because then it's going to mean something to you. My answer is yes, Ivan does win the argument at first, but then Alyosha tries to come back and doesn't let him have the final word. And this is what launches us into round two, the Grand Inquisitor speech that comes next immediately after it in the story. So I think at first, so this is a point for Ivan. Alyosha, Alexei, the saintly, the angel says, shoot him. Well, he says it softly, but in a way of deep admission that he sees that this is a departure from his official line as the completely godly one. Like if the suffering is redeemable, like, or what Alexei is saying here is, no, maybe you need to, met out an eye for an eye in some circumstances. Maybe horrible people deserve horrible things to happen to them. But that's where's the neighborly love in that? If you're willing to say shoot him, this seems like it's a departure from the New Testament message. So Ivan or Alyosha does grant Ivan's sort of purpose, and he can get in touch with that perspective. But ultimately, he doesn't want to go along with it. And by the end of it, he comes back with this line, but there is such a being. Wait a minute. But we don't necessarily have the power to forgive these things. They can't ultimately make sense to us, perhaps. Maybe we wouldn't agree to such a world, and we can't do it as finite humans, but God could do it. So, of course, there's such a being. You've forgotten about him. So if Jesus Christ is going to be the answer that's going to make it all make sense. And of course, whether this answer turns out to ultimately be satisfying or not depends upon how we understand the role of Jesus in Christianity. We need to understand Dostoevsky's view of that. And we have to read the Grand Inquisitor, so the speech that comes next. So you just have to look for round two. Let me again pause and return to some of the questions I asked you previously. Remember how all of these issues interrelate. So let me ask you, can you see some of the subplots that this one sort of almost throwaway line, this line that passes by very quickly and segues into the next speech, could make you think of? How does this relate to what else is going on in the story? So pause your videos and see if you can fill in some details. Okay, that was your chance. This theme, the theme it raises is forgiveness. Who has the power to forgive? What are the conditions for successful forgiveness, successful reconciliation? These are such important themes in the novel, and it comes up over and over again because, you know, Dmitri doesn't treat Katya well. He lends her the money, but sort of only out of spite, and doesn't want to be involved with her. She then comes and to save him, bails him out of prison, and is attempting to forgive him. So does that constitute successful forgiveness or not? Or Dmitri owes his owes his father money. Fyodor owes Dmitri money, according to Dmitri. Is either one of them capable, willing to forgive the other and make up and reconcile this relationship? Remember, Dmitri insults Snegurov and then later on tries to repent, and he sends Alyosha to pay him and ask for his forgiveness, and Snegurov throws the money on the ground and won't give it, in part because of his relationship with his son. So whether his son can forgive Snegurov is intimately related with whether Snegurov can forgive Dmitri. This theme of forgiveness comes up over and over again through the story. What you need to pay attention to is, what are the conditions of successful forgiveness, and what does that kind of relationship mean, and acknowledgement of the other mean for Dostoevsky's worldview? Okay, thanks.